In a world where the division between the sacred and the secular was often blurred, the aristocrats of early medieval Europe found a way to cloak their power in divine light. Imagine a time when the mere mention of a saint's name could silence a room, and the touch of a holy relic could change the course of destiny. This was the world of the 7th century, where the nobility and the saints were inextricably linked. Picture a grand hall, dimly lit by flickering torches, where a group of powerful men and women gather. They are the elite, the rulers, the ones who hold the fate of kingdoms in their hands. Among them stands a figure, not much different in appearance, yet radiating an aura of otherworldly grace. This is a saint, a holy man or woman, born into a noble family but elevated to a status far beyond the reach of mere mortals. They are nobilior sanctitate, nobler by sanctity. One such figure was Abbot Athala, the successor of the great Columbanus at Bobbio. Born into a noble Burgundian family, Athala's life story was one of transformation. While his birth gave him a seat at the table of the powerful, it was his deep piety and dedication to the faith that made him truly noble. He walked in the footsteps of his master, and in doing so, he transcended the boundaries of his earthly lineage. Fursey, another notable saint, was born into a noble family and was already respected in his community for his worldly status. But it was his unwavering faith and service to God that set him apart. He was not just noble by birth, he was nobler by faith, a man whose spiritual journey made him a beacon of light in the darkest of times. Arnulf of Metz, a Frankish nobleman, was also a shining example. Born into a family of great wealth and influence, he could have easily lived a life of comfort and luxury. Instead, he chose a path of deeper faith and service. His transformation from a man of the world to a man of God was so profound that it inspired many to follow in his footsteps. Even the women of this era were not left behind. Anstrude, a noblewoman, was known for her beauty and charm, but it was her inner sanctity that truly made her stand out. She was not just attractive by her physical features. She was more precious in her heart, a woman whose faith and virtue shone brighter than any earthly treasure. The lives of these saints were not just individual stories of transformation. They were also a reflection of the broader societal changes happening at the time. The kinship and family ties that bound the noble families together were seen as a reflection of the divine order. The saints and their noble patrons were part of a larger spiritual family, the Familia Christi, a community united by their faith and their shared mission to serve God. In this world, the lines between the noble and the holy were often indistinguishable. The saints were the ultimate role models, and their lives were celebrated in the hagiographies, Lives of the Saints, that were written to inspire and guide the people. These stories were not just about individual saints. They were about the families and the communities that supported them, about the virtues and the piety that were passed down from generation to generation. The 7th century was a time of great change, and the noble families played a crucial role in this transformation. They were not just the rulers of the land. They were the guardians of the faith. The saints among them were the living proof of the divine right to rule, and their stories were the foundation upon which the new order was built. As you read on, you will discover the intricate web of relationships, the struggles for power, and the deep spiritual journeys that defined this era. The noble and the holy were not separate entities. They were two sides of the same coin, bound together by a shared vision of a world where faith and virtue reigned supreme. In the year 842, Hrabanus Maurus, a very important scholar, faced a tough time. He was removed from his position as the head of the Fulda Abbey and had to move to the monastery of Petersburg. In this new place, he started working on a big project, a book called rerum naturis, on the nature of things. This book was meant to help people understand the world and the meaning behind everything they saw. Hrabanus wanted to show how all the things in the world are signs that point to a deeper, spiritual reality. Hrabanus didn't just copy an older book called the Etymologies by Isidore. Instead, he rearranged and expanded the content to fit his own ideas. He divided the book into 22 parts, each reflecting the 22 books in the Old Testament, as translated by Jerome. This structure was meant to show that everything in the world has a spiritual meaning and is connected to God. Hrabanus started with God and the heavenly beings, then moved on to the world and its creation, following the order described in the Bible. He talked about the Old Testament figures, then the New Testament figures, the Church, and the Scriptures. He also wrote about humans and animals, the elements of the earth, and various other topics, including paganism. For Hrabanus, understanding the world was the same as understanding God. He believed that all knowledge comes from divine revelation, and that knowing God means knowing everything else. This idea is similar to how some people today might use sociology to understand how society works. But for Hrabanus, it was all about seeing the spiritual connections in everything. One of the most interesting parts of Hrabanus's book is how he talked about family and kinship. He rearranged the sections on family relationships to show how they reflect the divine order. For example, he emphasized the authority of fathers and the importance of the father-son relationship, which he saw as a reflection of God the Father and Jesus the Son. He also talked about the mystical significance of mothers, seeing them as symbols of the Church, which gives birth to new believers. Hrabanus wrote a lot about marriage and how it represents the union of Christ and the Church. He saw the relationship between a husband and wife as a mirror of the spiritual bond between Christ and the Church. He even compared the womb of Mary, Jesus' mother, to the bridal chamber where Christ and the Church unite. Hrabanus's ideas about family and kinship were deeply spiritual. He believed that the relationships we see in the world are just physical representations of the deeper, spiritual bonds that exist between God, Christ, and the Church. For example, he saw brothers and sisters as symbols of the unity of all believers, and he compared the nurturing role of a mother to the Church's role in nurturing new believers. This way of thinking about family and kinship was not just theoretical. It reflected how many people in the Carolingian period understood the world around them. Even though Hrabanus was a highly educated scholar, his ideas were part of a broader cultural understanding of how society worked. This is why it's important to look at his work, to understand the beliefs and values of the time. To get a more complete picture, we can also look at the writings of laypeople from the same period. For example, Dhuoda, a noblewoman, wrote a handbook for her son, William, in 843. Dhuoda's book, called the Liber Manualis Handbook, is a moral guide filled with biblical teachings and advice. It shows how the ideas about family and kinship that Hrabanus wrote about were also important to laypeople. Dhuoda talked about the duties of a father and the importance of raising children in the faith, which aligns with Hrabanus's emphasis on paternal authority and spiritual guidance. By looking at both Hrabanus's scholarly work and Dhuoda's personal writing, we can see how the ideas of family and kinship were understood in the Carolingian period. These ideas were not just abstract concepts, but were deeply woven into the fabric of society, shaping how people thought about their relationships and their place in the world. Dhuoda, a noblewoman from the 9th century, wrote a special book for her son, William. This book, called the Liber Manualis, is full of advice on how to live a good life, love God, and respect those in authority, especially his father, Bernard of Septimania. Dhuoda's advice is deeply rooted in her Christian faith and her belief in the importance of obedience and love. Dhuoda believed that the world is a reflection of a greater spiritual order. She used this idea to teach William about the importance of obeying God and his earthly fathers, like Bernard. The book starts with chapters about God and the Trinity, emphasizing the divine order that everything in the world should follow. Then she moves on to talk about earthly fathers, using examples from the Bible to show how important it is to respect and obey them. Dhuoda used a lot of imagery to help William understand her lesson. For example, she compared herself to a dog, saying that just as a dog scurries around the table to find scraps of food, she was gathering bits of wisdom to share with her son. This humble image was a way for her to show that even though she was a noblewoman, she was only passing along the wisdom she had learned from others. One of the most important themes in the book is filial piety, which means showing respect and love to your parents and other authority figures. Dhuoda believed that if everyone followed this principle, it would bring peace and order to the world. She was writing during a time of great turmoil, with civil wars and political unrest, and she saw filial piety as a way to restore harmony. Dhuoda didn't just talk about fathers in the biological sense. She also discussed spiritual fathers. She used the words genitor, biological father, and pater, spiritual father, to show the connection between the two. For Dhuoda, being a father wasn't just about having children. It was about being a moral and spiritual guide. She even saw herself as a pater to William, guiding him in his spiritual journey. Dhuoda believed that love was the foundation of all good relationships. She used different words to express love, like amor and dauktio, but they all pointed to the same idea, that love is what binds people together, both to each other and to God. She advised William to love God, his father, and everyone around him, regardless of their status. She believed that if William showed love and compassion to others, he would be loved and respected in return. One of the most powerful images Dhuoda used was that of a herd of deer crossing a stream. She described how the deer support each other, resting their heads on each other for mutual help. This image of fraternal compassion, brotherly love, was a way for Dhuoda to teach William about the importance of community and mutual support. Just as the deer help each other, people should help each other, especially those who are weaker or in need. Dhuoda's advice was not just about personal virtue. It was also about how to navigate the complex world of court politics. She knew that William would have to deal with powerful people, and she taught him to be respectful and obedient to them, not because of their status, but because they were part of the divine order. She also encouraged him to be a cheerful giver, to serve others, and to always act with love and compassion. Through her book, Dhuoda hoped to guide William on a path that would lead to both worldly success and spiritual salvation. She believed that by following the principles of filial piety and love, William could find true happiness and meaning in his life. Dhuoda, a woman living in a time of kings and nobles, wrote a book to guide her son, William, on how to live a good and pious life. Her advice was rooted in a deep Christian faith and a belief in the importance of family and community. For Dhuoda, the idea of flesh meant that all people, rich or poor, shared a common origin and destiny. She believed that everyone would eventually return to dust, so those who were successful should help the less fortunate. She encouraged William to find the needy and comfort them with kindness and generosity, showing them the same compassion he would want for himself. Dhuoda emphasized the importance of behaving well and being loyal to those in authority, especially his father, Bernard. She told William that if he showed love and respect to his father and the other important people around him, he would have the spirit of piety and be blessed by God. She also reminded William that his loyalty to his father and others was conditional on their righteousness. If they acted unjustly, William should not follow them blindly. Dhuoda often referred to the Beatitudes, which are teachings from Jesus that emphasize virtues like purity, chastity, justice, and fairness. She urged William to love these virtues and to help the poor, so he wouldn't forget to care for his fellow human beings. She warned him about the fate of those who lived wickedly and led others to ruin, emphasizing that noble blood was meaningless if it led to corruption and injustice. Dhuoda also talked a lot about family and inheritance. She wanted William to pray for the relatives who had left their property to his father, Bernard, and to pray that he would use these inheritances wisely and with God's blessing. She believed that if William lived humbly and worthily, God would bless him with more dignity and success. She encouraged him to pray for the souls of those who had once owned the family properties, asking God to reward them for their good deeds. Dhuoda mentioned a list of family members who had passed away, including William's grandparents and some of his father's siblings. She told William to pray for these relatives, and even for those who had suffered or been wronged, like his uncle Heribert, who had been blinded and banished. She also mentioned that some of her own relatives were powerful people, indicating that her family was also of noble stock. However, Dhuoda didn't spend much time on the details of their family tree. She saw her family as part of a larger community of believers, both on earth and in heaven. She instructed William to pray for many different groups of people, starting with the clergy and then moving to the king, his father, and other important figures. Only after these prayers did she mention the family members. This shows that for Dhuoda, the most important relationships were those with God and the broader Christian community. Dhuoda's advice was rooted in a patriarchal system, where loyalty to God and one's father were paramount. She wanted William to fear and love God above all else, and then to show the same respect to his father and other authorities. This obedience was not just a matter of following rules, but was seen as a reflection of divine truth. In Dhuoda's world, the royal court and the king were seen as extensions of God's authority on earth. Dhuoda's family, including her husband Bernard, were deeply involved in the affairs of the court. Bernard held important titles, such as Duke of Septimania and Count of Barcelona, but he and his family did not have a fixed home. They moved between different regions, and their properties and honors were often tied to their service to the king. Dhuoda's manual, written from a place called Uzes, was a way for her to pass on her values and wisdom to William. She saw herself as a guide and a protector, not just for her son, but for the entire family. Her teachings were about more than just family loyalty. They were about living a life that honored God and contributed to the well-being of the community. While Dhuoda's family was part of a noble lineage, they did not have a strong territorial base like some other noble families. This lack of a fixed center might seem strange, but it reflects the fluid and court-centered nature of their lives. The royal court was the center of their world, and their status and success depended on their relationships and service to the king. Dhuoda's manual is a window into a world where family, faith, and service to the king were deeply intertwined. Her advice to William was about more than just being a good nobleman. It was about being a good Christian, a good son, and a good member of the community. Through her words, we can see the values and beliefs that shaped her life and the lives of those around her. The world of the Franks during the Carolingian period was deeply intertwined with the spiritual and the monastic. Families were not just groups of related individuals. They were part of a larger, divine order that extended from earthly monasteries to the heavens. This vision is vividly captured in the lives of figures like Dhuoda and Nithard, whose stories reveal the complex ways in which kinship and religious devotion shaped their identities and actions. Dhuoda, for example, lived in a world where monastic life was central. Her manual, A Guide for Her Son, is rich with references to monastic rules and practices. She saw herself not just as a mother, but as a spiritual guide, drawing authority from her understanding of monastic life. Her family, too, was deeply embedded in this monastic world. Her ancestors were involved in founding monasteries, and her son was expected to follow in this tradition. This connection to monasticism was not just about personal piety. It was about belonging to a broader community of the faithful, a community that stretched beyond the living to include the saints and the divine. Nithard, on the other hand, provides a different but equally telling perspective. His history of the civil wars between the sons of Louis the Pious is a personal and political account, but it is also deeply spiritual. Nithard's family, like Dhuoda's, was tied to a monastery, St. Riquir. When he wrote about his origins, he did so in a way that highlighted his father's connection to this monastery and his own place within its community. Nithard's father, Angilbert, was a saint, and his remains were venerated at St. Riquir. This sanctity was not just a source of pride. It was a way of understanding his place in the world and his relationship to others. Nithard's account of his family is striking because it is more about his father's saintliness and his connection to the monastery than about his descent from Charlemagne. While modern readers might be captivated by the idea of Nithard being a grandson of Charlemagne, for Nithard, his father's sanctity and his own role in the monastic community were more significant. This reflects a broader understanding of kinship in the Carolingian world, where family ties were not just about blood, but about shared faith and communal belonging. The monasteries of this period were not just religious institutions. They were centers of power and influence. They were places where families could cement their status, and where individuals could find a sense of purpose and belonging. The monastic world provided a framework for understanding one's place in society and one's relationship to the divine. For Dhuoda and Nithard, and for many others, this framework was essential. In the end, the stories of Dhuoda and Nithard show us that the Carolingian period was a time when the lines between the secular and the sacred were often blurred. Families were not just social units, they were spiritual communities. The monasteries and the saints who were venerated, they were central to how people understood themselves and their place in the world. This vision of kinship and society, deeply rooted in monastic and Christian ideals, shaped the lives and actions of the people of this time in profound ways. So, as we look back on the lives of Dhuoda and Nithard, we see not just the stories of individuals, but a glimpse into a world where the divine and the human were intimately connected, and where family and faith were inextricably linked. This vision offers us a deeper understanding of the complex and rich tapestry of early medieval society.